So when we meditate, we have this idea because of maybe some sort of publicity or positive spin that meditation is going to change our life. Have you heard that before? Yeah? Do you agree? Some degree. There's a big shake of the head at the back there. So it's hard to know, right? Like, does it help us or does it not help us? It helps. Well, we're going to keep on telling ourselves that, aren't we, if we're at a meditation retreat?
People who struggle, but I have a friend and she said she doesn't like meditation. She's tried it. She finds it really difficult because it brings up all sorts of...
Yeah, for some people it won't help, and I don't recommend meditation for everybody, especially people who have mental health issues such as delusional thinking or paranoid thinking, obsessive thinking, intrusive thoughts. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to those people. I wouldn't recommend it to them all the time. I might recommend in like small doses or in a controlled environment or when they're feeling well. But if they're not feeling well, then meditation can be really harmful. You're sitting there with your mind, and if you have like delusional thinking or obsessive thoughts, then that's all you've got, right? So it's not good. If you have a lot of anxiety and you sit for meditation, then that anxiety can just increase and it can become really bad. So I would maybe recommend for a person with anxiety to do some walking meditation. Walking meditation is very calming, and then just sit for a few minutes and see how they feel. And if they're feeling good, then sit for longer. And if they're feeling good, then sit for longer. But it isn't a cure-all. And from what I saw, most of you are not meditating a huge amount. So even if meditation has this power to change our life, if we're only doing it once a month, how much of our life is it going to change? Right? If we're only doing it once every 2 weeks, let alone once a week or even once a day, we'll get some benefit from that practice. We will. Every time we meditate, we're presented with an opportunity to learn, and we're presented with an opportunity for spiritual growth. However, we can't expect that if we're only meditating 1 hour out of, how many hours are there in a week? I don't know, 24 times 7, a lot. So if we're only meditating 1 hour a week, we can't expect a huge amount of results. The place that we're really going to see the development of our meditation practice is on an intensive retreat when we're meditating 8, 10, 12 hours a day. That's when you'll see the effect of the meditation. When we're meditating once a day, we'll still get benefits, but it'll be much more subtle and it'll be much more slow. And so we can't expect for huge leaps and bounds in our spiritual practice when we're only chipping away at the edges. It's good that we're chipping away at the edges, but we're not going to make a huge amount of progress in that way. And I say that to be honest, not to kind of lead you on some fairy chase of promising, if you just meditate once, you can achieve the high states of bliss, right? So this is not very skillful. It's like any other skill, meditation. If you work hard at it and you practice it regularly, then you'll get the benefits. If you want to learn a language, or if you want to learn something like yoga or whatever, you need to put in the time to get the results, right? But there's the problem. Time. Time is the secret ingredient in our spiritual practice. Time is what's required for spiritual growth. Unfortunately, as humans, time is something we don't have a lot of. We'll be doing a death contemplation today, so that's a big kind of finiteness of time. Our time is running out. but even just in the course of a day, who has the time? Am I right? Who has the time? I'm very fortunate I can meditate all day, in between emails and whatever else I have to do. But for most people, they have a busy life. They're looking after family, they have pets, they have responsibilities. They can't possibly do a whole heap of meditation. And that's okay, it's fine. And actually, that's great, because it means that you have all this other time where you can do good things in your life, in the course of your daily activities. So there's often this artificial distinction between our spiritual practice and the rest of our life. Have you noticed this? People like to sequester the two. Oh, I'm going to go and do my meditation retreat now. I'm going to go do my spiritual practice now for this 1 hour a month, 1 hour a week. But that's not what it means to be a spiritual practitioner. We actually need to integrate our spiritual practice into our everyday life. That's where it matters the most. Because this is where we live in our everyday life. We don't live in some idealized land on a cushion. That's not our spiritual home. That's where our practice is done, perhaps. That's where our practice will matter. But where it needs to show up is in our daily life. And if it doesn't show up in our daily life, then there's something wrong with our practice. Meditation is a process. So have you noticed that? In the session this morning, I introduced you to some aspects of the meditation process. Where we started, we relaxed. We saw the shift from having a tight body, full of tension, to a relaxed, calm body. And then we saw, when we're relaxed and calm in the body, the mind becomes peaceful. And you'll see as we go along this kind of method of meditation, when the mind is peaceful, then the breath naturally appears. You don't have to go looking for the breath, you don't have to hunt it out, it's just suddenly there. When the breath is there, you've got this mindfulness, which is very powerful. And then what happens next is joy will start to appear in your mind. But it's a process. After you get that joy, other things will start to happen too, and I'll talk about them later. It's a deepening of happiness. We go from joy to rapture, from rapture to bliss, from bliss to samadhi, from samadhi to seeing clearly, to understanding more the nature of the mind. But before we even get to sit down on the mat, that's where things matter too. So it's a mistake to think you can just turn up on the cushion and have a good meditation experience, because it's a process. Meditation is a process. The stuff that you do before you sit down matters. And this is why sometimes it's a little frustrating to see the way things like mindfulness can be promoted in various settings, where it's treated as like a cure-all, it's treated as something that is in and of its own a complete path. But if you're only looking at a small part of a spiritual practice, not looking at the big picture of your life, then you're missing out on a trick. And so sometimes you see like corporations, for example, telling their stressed out workers, this is a true story for Amazon, you know, they have meditation pods in Amazon, which are like these kind of like slightly fancy toilet cubicles. And you go there if you're stressed out, and there's like dolphin music playing, and there's like a cushion. and you go there because you're stressed out. You're stressed out because your job is hell, and they won't let you have a toilet break, and you have to complete so many things within an hour, and you're getting surveilled the whole time, and blah, blah, blah. And so, I mean, this is similar to what we do to ourselves. Like, we think, oh, I'll just go meditate, and then everything will be okay. But no, you get out, and you've still got this horrible job, you know. You get out, and you've still got your mind, you know, you've still got your life, you've still got all your problems. So what I'm trying to get you to become aware of is the fullness of your spiritual practice. It's not just coming here to sit for a few hours on a cushion. Whenever I talk to someone about their practice, I say, oh, how's your practice going? And they'll say, oh, my meditation's going really well. It's like, your meditation is just one aspect of your spiritual practice. There's so much more. If we're spiritual beings, we don't just hack a part of ourselves off and say, that's my spiritual part and this is the rest of my life. We need to integrate those parts of ourselves. We want to take our spiritual practice from the periphery of our life and bring it into the centre of our life. That doesn't mean you have to shave your head and become a monk or whatever. It doesn't mean you have to start bowing to statues or lighting incense all day. What it means is you bring a spiritual perspective into your daily life, and that you value it and that it matters to you. Most of you probably already do this in some way, but I'm asking you to become more aware of it. The reason I'm asking you to become aware of it is because this is a skillful means for us to integrate the things that we do in our daily life into our meditation practice. And the things that we do in our meditation practice, to integrate them into our everyday life, so that we become much fuller, much more spiritual people generally. And so we are already pretty good people in this room, I can tell. I mean, you're the creme de la creme, actually, of the humans. You are thinking about your minds. You're wanting to work on your minds, right? This is actually incredibly rare in people. Most people, it would never occur to them, I'm going to go and do a meditation retreat. There's billions of people in the world. So few people have thought, oh, this is something I want to do. This is something that interests me. So you're already pretty good people, right? Do we agree? Yeah? We've met each other. See? That's right, Virginia. And that's the kind of enthusiasm we need when we look at ourselves. Because one of the problems for us is that we have these minds that fixate on our bad qualities and fixate on problems and fixate on hurts, wounds. And we do ourselves a disservice. Because the spiritual path is a path where we acknowledge that there's bad parts of us and we try to work on it. But we acknowledge the good parts of us and we celebrate those. And that's why I'm going to talk a little bit now about generosity and why I mentioned it earlier today. Because generosity was something that the Buddha always used whenever he met someone for the first time. He'd always start out talking about generosity because it's something simple that everyone can understand and that all cultures, all religions, all practitioners have an understanding of. And I said this morning that generosity is like a form of letting go, that we're giving, that we're not holding on, right? And so there's many reasons for thinking about generosity. I said that many different spiritual traditions practice generosity, yeah? But when you're being generous, are you thinking of it as a spiritual act? Or are you just thinking, oh, I'm just doing this thing? Like, how are you thinking about the activities you do outside of your meditation seat, We like bring all this mindfulness and awareness to our sitting posture. And then the rest of the time, we just kind of like, yeah, whatever. But the stuff that you do in your everyday life is spiritual, right? So before, when Venerable Sama said, oh, is the mundane stuff, does that lead to joy? And I was like, yes, but asterisks. This is the kind of thing that leads to joy. Things like giving. You know this, right? It makes you happy to give. And there's so many examples, and you can think of so many occasions in your own life when you've done something kind and generous. And who knows what's going on in your mind at the time? There's this inspiration that happens, right? And it wells up inside of you and you're like, oh, I'll do that. I'll do that for them. And where was that idea beforehand? Where did it come from? It's like before when we were talking about joy. And I was like, where does it come from? Where does this stuff come from? Who knows? Maybe there's like this ocean in our subconscious or somewhere, and just these things are just waiting to come up, to pop up, to surface. That's why I said before that being a monk, walking down the street with my bowl, collecting alms, is being like a slow-moving target for people's generosity. For those people who are familiar with what a monk represents, they see it as an opportunity to do something, to practice generosity. So you see Asian people all the time, they'll see the monks coming and they'll be like, quick, let's go to the shop and get something to give or something. Because there's this generosity that's always there under the surface, waiting for an opportunity. In the same way, there's joy always there inside of you, waiting to come out, right? It just needs an opportunity. It just needs a reason to appear. It needs the causes and conditions to be correct. I remember once going on alms round, and I was with my friend Bhante Sujato, and we had our bowls, and we actually went into a shopping centre, which we don't usually do. It was kind of like this random adventure. It was like, oh my gosh, it was so hellish. You know, there's the lights, there's KFC, there's all this stuff and all this activity, and I was kind of freaking out because I'd just been on a long, intensive meditation retreat and my mind was very sensitive. And so it was pretty intense. And this girl came up to us. She's maybe like 18, 19. And she said, I don't know what you are, but I just want to give you something. And we're like, okay, that's very nice of you. She said, I don't have anything to give. I've got these. And she had these like little stones, like semi-precious stones, not anything precious. And she's like, can I give these to you? I'm like, sure. You know, we always encourage people's generosity, right? And so she gave it to us. And she said, what are you doing anyway? And we're like, oh, we're Buddhist monks. We're going for alms food. And she's like, are you hungry? I've told you, we only eat once a day, so yes. And she's like, oh, I've got this banana bread. Do you want this banana bread? And she put it into our bowls. She didn't know what we were doing. She didn't understand anything about Buddhism. She just knew that she could give. And it was this beautiful inspiration that she had. And you see this all the time, and because I'm often on the receiving end of people's generosity, I notice it. So I notice it when Brooke offers to wash the dishes. I notice it when Rainey comes and helps to pick me up from the airport, or when Terry comes and picks me up, or when Paula offers me a lovely cup of coffee, or when Sharon offers me another lovely cup of coffee. Right? Like, I notice these things. I notice the generosity of people being inspired to give something and then saying, as both of you said, oh, do you want a little biscuit to go along with that? Or, so this is kind of like even more generosity. And you start to see that generosity is this thing that is out there in the world and that we just need to be sometimes reminded of a little bit. We practice generosity all the time, right? We're generous people, but we don't notice it, which is a missed opportunity. So there's a story in the suttas, the teachings of the Buddha, where there's this woman, Visakha. Visakha is regarded as being foremost in generosity. She was one of those people who really got into being generous. And one day the Buddha said to her, look, what's in it for you? And she was like, oh, well, I get to give these to the monks and nuns, and, that's just a nice thing to do. Then they can wear them, and she's offering robes and stuff. And he's like, no, what's in it for you? Tough question, right? Like, what's in it for you when you're being generous? And so she said, well, when I'm generous, later on, I reflect upon my generosity. When I reflect upon my generosity, joy appears in my mind. When joy appears in my mind, it becomes deeper and deeper and becomes rapture. When rapture appears, it becomes deeper and deeper and becomes bliss. And this bliss takes me to samadhi. Samadhi is like a deep state of meditation. And this deep state of meditation, she says, creates the right environment for wisdom to appear in her mind. And she says she develops these 7 bojjhangas, these 7 states of enlightenment stages. And she says all of these things come from this act of generosity. And so the Buddha was like, very good. That's a pretty good answer to the question, right? What's in it for you? And that's, everything, yeah? So the path that I just outlined there is actually like the entire path to enlightenment. She was talking about doing a good action, getting a result, and then getting these successively more deep states of meditation. And then those last things are these wisdom states that she was talking about. And these are like deep insights into the nature of reality. And so, like pretty thorough answer that she gave. And so what was different about Visakha was that she understood the relationship between cause and effect, between action and result. And she knew how to work with the mind in order to appreciate it. But what happens with us so frequently, especially for white people, is that we have this idea that being generous is something that we should just do and not be proud of. You don't want to have, like, especially if you grew up in like a Catholic house or something, or maybe an Anglican as well, you don't have any pride about your acts of charity and things like that. Or we just think, okay, I've given and that's enough. Don't make a fuss. It's nothing. Don't worry about it. And this isn't the way that a lot of Asian cultures, especially Buddhist cultures, see it. They see being generous, being kind, as a source of merit. Merit is this stuff that it's like all our good vibes in the mind. We kind of collect these good vibes. We've done a good action and we feel good about ourselves, and this is our result. This is kind of merit, it's called in Buddhism and Hinduism also. Now the Buddha said, the act of giving a single grain of rice like a creature, or, you know, with the intention, you know, may living beings, when we wash out our bowls, for example, we dump it somewhere, and we think, oh, may those living beings benefit, you know, may those little creatures eat these leftovers or whatever, or I feed food to the pigeons, or whenever we do an act like this of sharing food, the Buddha said that this act of sharing food, as we did today, creates an incalculable amount of merit. So much, it's impossible to calculate. He said, just as when we talk about the ocean, we don't calculate it. We say it's incalculable. There's a lot of water. In the same way, he said, there's a lot of merit in this action of giving. There's a lot of good vibes that come to you through this act of giving. The problem is that we don't know how to access it. We don't know how to work with that mind. And so when we give, we just give, and then we don't take the chance to celebrate it, or to think back on it, or to understand why it's good. So that's why today when the food was offered to me and I said, now I'm going to chant an anumodana. Anumodana means rejoicing along with. What are we rejoicing? Rejoicing over the generosity that you had, that you showed. Rejoicing is an amplification of joy, right? Rejoicing. You do something good, you should feel good. And if you want to multiply that goodness, if you want to create more in your mind, you rejoice over the goodness that you've done. You are good people. The first time I said that to you, I saw a little bit of sort of like, no, I'm not. And you sit there and you think, if you knew what I was thinking during that meditation, Bhante, you wouldn't say that I'm a good person at all. But you are good people. And if we want to make progress on the spiritual path, we need to move from one stage to the next, to the next, to the next. But you need to be aware of where you're at. You need to be aware of the things that are present in your mind and the things that are absent. And you need to know when you've got unwholesome, unhelpful qualities in the mind, and you need to know when they're absent, and you need to know when you have wholesome, positive qualities in your mind, and you need to know when they're present. So take something like generosity and giving. The opposite of generosity and giving? Miserliness, selfishness, stinginess. We've all got that too, right? Yeah? I mean, we're generous people, but there's limits. Yeah? And it's just where that limit is placed that means, you know, we might become a very stingy person if we're not careful, who never gives, like Scrooge, you know, never gave. We'll get no enjoyment from that. We'll get no joy from hoarding our wealth. We'll get no joy from not doing acts of service and helping each other. We become, the Buddha said, like a forest pool that's haunted by ghosts. No one wants to go near that forest pool. And it's the same, you can see, yeah, you know, we all know some miserly people, right? Maybe it's us. But we all know someone who's miserly. They're the kind of person you don't take out for dinner, yeah? Or they're the person who you know the kind of person who you know is selfish. So the Buddha said there's 3 types of people in this world that can be compared to a rain cloud. So the first kind of person that can be compared to a rain cloud is the cloud that doesn't rain. This is a miserly person, a selfish person, never gives. Second type of person that can be compared to a rain cloud is the kind of cloud that rains locally. And that kind of cloud is the kind of person, probably like most of us, like will give to people locally. That means people we know, people we like, people who we have some investment in, maybe some quid pro quo. Locally, a small amount of people, specific groups of people, locally. The third kind of person is like the cloud that rains everywhere. And the Buddha says it's such a beautiful image, maybe not after the floods and everything, but there's this beautiful image of the rain cloud. He said, this rain cloud just rains over everything and it buckets down and it fills the little tiny rivulets in the soil that becomes the little streams that lead to the creeks, that lead to the rivers. And it keeps flowing up and filling up the lakes and filling up these giant rivers that lead down to the ocean. And this ocean, we know, we can understand the image with a scientific principle. This is where the water comes from that creates the rain, right? So it just keeps on going around and around and around. And this is what comes from generosity. And the Buddha said this is how we should be. We should be open-handed, generous, kind, giving. And when you're like this, you've let go of a lot. When you give, you're letting go. All of those things that you hang on to, all of those things that you grasp tightly and don't want to let go of, all the bits and pieces in your homes, all your money, whatever, none of that will help you when you die. The Buddha said what is given is saved. If you give it, the thieves can't take it, floods can't take it from you, the king can't take it from you, taxes and things like that. And so the Buddha was encouraging this act of generosity, always encouraging people to give and give and give. And so I understand, like some people looking at me now like, yeah, well, I'm not going to give everything away. Well, you're not expected to give everything away. What maybe you could start to think about is when you don't give away stuff, what is the mind that comes into play? It's miserliness or selfishness maybe. Or there's a certain amount that you need and that's fine. I'm not talking about like giving up everything and becoming homeless and things like that. You give what you can. But what's important to acknowledge is the kind of mind that comes along with generosity. And so when you're being generous, what's good is that you're developing a mind that is not selfish, that is not miserly. But if you're being selfish and miserly, then you're not also developing at that time the mind of generosity. And so I hope you can see this link between letting go and generosity. And I hope you can see that, as we'll do in a moment, this is something that you can do in your everyday life that you can then bring into your meditation practice. Because when you're generous and kind, you feel good about yourself. You feel good. This is an underrated, this is like a superpower, in everyday life. Feeling good is pretty special. Feeling happy that you've done something kind and generous. Seeing the joy on someone's face when you give. And it can be so mundane. the way you think about it that's important. You have to feed the cats. You're feeding these creatures that rely upon you. How much beautiful, wonderful happiness is in that moment. And we just like, whatever. No, but here you are doing this beautiful thing, right? Doing the act of washing the dishes. Like, sure, you could be like, just got to get through this. Or you can be like, yeah, I'm a good person. I'm looking after this group of people. Like, this is the job that no one wants to do. I can do it, you know? Or helping out with the organisation for the retreat, or whatever it is. Like, this is mundane, everyday stuff. But this is an opportunity for you to develop your mind, to develop on the spiritual path. Can you see that? Question?
Yeah. Does it make a difference if your motivation is to feel good yourself rather than help the other person?
Good question. So we call that mixed giving. You know, it's like there's different types of giving that we can do, I guess. So you might give because you've been told to by a teacher or someone, or your parents told you, you know, we do this, this is our tradition, this is our culture. You might give because you want to get something back in return. You might give because you've been told that it's good karma. Or you might give because you've been told that it will lead to a heavenly rebirth. Or you might give just thinking this is an ornament of the mind and it's a beautiful thing to have in your mind. And the Buddha said that out of all these types of mixed giving, the last one is the most beautiful, because it's like you do this practice, you give, you know that you get good results, but you do it only because it's an ornament for the mind. And that means that it's just like an accessory. It's like the jewels that some of our friends are wearing. You're a good person, you have a good mind, and the accessory that you have is this beautiful mind of giving. But it's just a small part of your mind. I'm making a big deal about it in this conversation, but this is just the very first step on the Buddha's spiritual path. So when we have this kind of fuller picture of what the mind is and what it means to have a mind, then we can see where giving fits in. But at the very beginning of our spiritual path, this letting go, this act of generosity, this is starting to develop the mind in a really good way. And then we build upon that act of generosity, and we can get deeper and deeper into our meditation practice. Because what's happening is that we're starting to loosen this idea of me, of mine, my stuff, my money, my things. And we're starting to loosen up about these things that, you know, they don't really matter that much, you know, in the big picture. In the spiritual path, money is just stuff, you know. You can't take it with you when you're gone. What you do take with you is things like your mind and good feelings and all of that kind of stuff. And you actually see this. I work as a chaplain. I work with people who are dying. And you see people at the end of their lives. Some people are obsessed about their stuff. And it's like, listen, dear, you are dying. You can't hold on to this stuff. You can't take this with you. And they're worried about it, they're concerned about it, you know. And then you see other people, and this is what we encourage in Buddhism, we encourage people to reflect upon their generosity at the end of their life. We encourage people to remember the things they gave, all the service they gave, the presents they gave, the kindness they gave to others. What happens? Joy, in their mind. At the end of your life, it doesn't matter how many ornaments you have, how much money you have. What matters is the people, the beings that you touched. And so when you die, I mean, this is the ultimate act of letting go. You have to let go of the body, right? But if we've been practicing all our life, giving, letting go, then we can die with very few regrets in the mind. We can die without a lot of remorse. We can die without a selfish, stingy mind. We can die with a mind that is open-hearted, giving, kind, generous, uplifted, and full of joy. So we kind of have this choice. And of course, if you wait to the end of your life and you think, well, I'm going to hold on to all this stuff, but I'll give it away in my will. Who knows what's going to happen? You never get to see it. Better to give with a warm hand, a warm hand than a cold hand. Is that right? Cold heart? Better to give with a warm hand than a cold heart. Is that right? Yeah. So you want to give when you're alive, because then you can see it. No point in giving when you're dead. You can't actually get any joy that way. And when we give, we want to amplify that joy in our mind as well. So it's not a selfish act to do that. Like it might sound like, oh, well, the only person getting any benefit here is actually you. And of course, if it wasn't good for you and good for others, then it wouldn't be a good thing. If it was only good for them and not good for you, you wouldn't do it. If it was only good for you and not for them, then you wouldn't do it, right? It's because it's good for yourself and for others that it's a truly wholesome thing to do. So it's something we can celebrate. And so this is one of the things that the Buddha taught as a vehicle for inspiring joy in the mind. And there's many other things. They're called the anussitis, the recollections. And anussati means to be mindful again. So sati means mindful. Anu means again. So we become mindful again of these things. And so they're things like ethical conduct, the qualities of the Buddha, the qualities of the Dhamma, qualities of the Sangha, the qualities of stilling. And then another one that we'll do today is mindfulness of death. So these things are designed to be reflected upon and to bring joy into the mind. So this is a kind of slightly different meditation to the meditation that you might practice more regularly, which is kind of more focusing on the breath or watching sensations in the body. It's more of a pondering kind of meditation, a kind of bit of a thinky meditation. But then what happens, you'll see, is that joy will appear in the mind and you'll notice it. And that joy becomes what we call piti. Piti is like, maybe some of you experience it in your meditation practice, rapture. It's where you feel like these little tingles up and down your spine, goosebumps, pleasurable feelings coursing through your body. This piti can become very, very strong. It can lift you up almost. It feels like bubbling, beautiful energy inside you that just tickles every part of your body and mind. It becomes very, very beautiful. And then what happens is the body becomes very calm because you're going through this pleasant experience of the mind. You've done a good thing, joy appears, and then that deepens and becomes that piti, that rapture. And then the things that happen with the body start to disappear, start to shut down. The body becomes very calm. Kaya passaddhi. This is bodily tranquility. You feel so good. You don't want to leave. Your body doesn't bother you. It's just so pleasant inside the mind. It feels so good to have this relaxed body. And then, what happens next? Bliss, sukha. So we're going through these increasingly pleasant sensations in the mind and body. It's a process that occurs. And then this bliss can become very powerful. You asked before about like the ceiling limit on things like joy. You have no idea that you can take so much bliss, it'll knock you over. You'll be pulsating with bliss. I've had these experiences with bliss where I was sure I couldn't take any more. These profound, deep experiences of pleasure in the mind. But you can always take more bliss. As my teacher, Ajahn Brahm, says, it's like bliss upon bliss upon bliss, and it just gets more and more intense. And that process of meditation is what leads to samadhi, which is the stillness of the mind. It's a process of being drawn in, away from the external world, away from the world of the senses, moving inward, 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 moving from a gross experience of sensory pleasure to a very subtle and refined experience of mental pleasure, spiritual pleasure. And that draws the mind in through this pleasant experience into stillness. So when you've got a mind like that, you can see very clearly the things that prevent you from having that experience. You can see the hindrances, we call them. They're things like restlessness or sense desire or anger. All of these things prevent you from feeling good. Same with things like miserliness, selfishness. This prevents you from feeling good. And so that's why this path of letting go, of developing joy in the mind, is so important, because it is fundamentally transforming the nature of your mind and thrusting you in the direction of goodness. And so that's why it's important to reflect upon our generosity and to be aware of it, so that we can make much of it, develop it, increase it, and see the results in our own minds. And then when you see the results in your own mind, you have a lot of confidence, you have a lot of faith. This is why he was talking so much about generosity. This is the result I got from practicing that. I understand it now. And then you'll want to be more generous in the future. It's like this positive feedback loop. And I see these people who love being generous. They'll fall over themselves to be kind to other people. They'll push people out of it. No, they won't. But the point being is generosity, once you see it happening, is infectious. People want to get in on it because it feels good. They see something happening, and we're hardwired to share as humans. And you can imagine what kind of world it could be if we shared things with others, if we cared about other people. Because in a way, being generous is an act of love. You care about the other person. And so that's why it's such a simple thing, but it's so profound to think that something so simple can have such deep spiritual significance. And that's why everyday life matters. The things that we do in our homes with our family, just putting away someone's socks for them as an act of love, not as an act of resentment and passive aggressiveness, or cooking someone a special meal, calling up your friend to say, "Oh, look, how are you doing? You want to talk?" These are spiritual activities, and the tragedy is that we don't perceive them as such, and we think coming to sit is our spiritual activity. But if that's all we do, then we're really missing out. All this other stuff, we start paying attention to it, we can make a beautiful mind that is full of joy in everyday life. And you walk around, you feel happy, you're a good person. And this is like an everyday ecstasy. It's like an ordinary bliss that you can have. And so that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about generosity. And if you have any questions, we can ask some questions now. And then we'll have a little break again, I think. And then we'll do the practice that I've been talking about, which is the recollection of generosity. It's called Chaganusati. And hopefully you'll see some results.